Hi everybody, my name is Rich Helvey. I'm the lead animator over at Access Hollywood for NBC. And one of the funnest things about my job, the thing that I enjoy the most, is when I start working on backgrounds. Because this is my fun time, this is my play time. It's where I get to experiment and I get to play with all kinds of different things that I haven't really tried before. I'm not worried about, can I read this, or is that spelled correctly, or whatever. I'm just trying to make something that looks cool. And so I'm going to teach you how to do some backgrounds, some of the neat things that I've discovered over the years. But there's something to remember as you're making a background. You want to be aware of what's going to go on top of it. You want to make sure that if you're putting text on top, that you can read the text. That means that you don't want to have the background stand out too much. You don't want to have lots of brights and lots of darks and all kinds of confusing things like that. You don't want to have things moving too fast, maybe. You don't want to have things be too slow and too boring. You want to really make sure that your background fits what you're going to be using it for. But in general, if you stick with a muted color palette that doesn't range from too many different colors all over the place, you should be okay. But you want to have fun with it. You want to experiment. You want to try things that maybe you haven't tried or you haven't had an excuse to do before. And somewhere along the way, you'll stumble upon some really cool things. So let's get started, and I'll show you some of the stuff that I've found and some of the ways that you can use one scene to make mini backgrounds really easily. In this chapter, we're going to show you how to make probably the simplest backgrounds you can, just using one volumetric light and certain procedural textures in them. In fact, these 8 backgrounds that we're showing now were created from the same master scene. And we just changed a couple colors here and there and a few little minor tweaks on the procedurals. And then we're going to show you how to go into After Effects and how to make your backgrounds even better and how to combine things together so that you come up with even more backgrounds off of one master scene. Okay, so let's actually start by making a background. The first set that we're going to make are going to be really simple. There's no objects involved. All we're going to be doing is using the volumetric lights, and we're going to show you how to set up sort of one base environment that you can use and then modify it just by changing a few parameters here and there and get a bunch of new backgrounds just by switching a few things and then re-rendering. So here we have a default scene set up, and we're going to look through the camera and let's select our light and move it where we can see it right there. And what we want to do is we want to fill space with this environment, and we want this volumetric light to fill up the whole screen, and we're going to apply a texture into the volumetric. And so what we want to do really is position the light in such a way that when we apply volumetrics to it, it'll fill the whole screen. And remember that the nice thing about using a volumetric light is that it provides your backgrounds with the necessary depth that you're going to use. So we'll take the lights here and turn on volumetric lighting. Now I'm using a distant light. This is nice as a filler, as opposed to if we had used a spotlight. You'll see it'll come to a cone like this. And for what we're doing, for our purposes now, this is not going to help us too much. Spotlights are good if you have the light like right in the center of the screen and it's looking towards you and you want those light beams that burst out and everything. But if we're just trying to just sort of get a general fill of the screen, we want to use a distant light. And we'll go into the volumetric light options here. And let's turn the quality down to low right now. And we're going to increase the radius. We want it to really fill up the screen. And we're going to increase the height as well. Make it nice and large. We'll take the light, and right now we're going to see the edge of this cylinder of light. We don't really want to do that. So we're going to move it by holding down the control key. I can move it just on its local z-axis. So we'll move it back so we can't see that. And then the other side of it is off here, off the edge of the camera somewhere. And so let's turn on Viper and sort of see what we've got. All right, well, it's filling the screen with pure white. which is not terribly useful. So let's bump up the attenuation, and let's sort of work so that we have a good gradation falling across. And in this case, we can either give it color by adding some redshift or subtracting redshift, which is going to turn it, red or blue. Or if you leave this 0, you can add color by changing the color of the medium. This changes the actual air color. Or if we put it back to white, you can also change the color by changing the color of the light. For instance, we can make it blue, like that. So there's a lot of different ways you can apply color to it. And combining these is going to be key in getting the right color combinations. For instance, here we've got the light is blue, but if we add redshift to it, and let's drop the attenuation, see it's turning kind of greenish. You keep on adding it, and you get this green to blue gradation. And it's kind of science fiction-y almost. I'll drop the density down because a little too much of a pure color in there. It's a little too hot. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. This may be just a little bit too blue. Take it a little bit more into the green. Okay, so there we've got something. Now this all by itself is rather boring. It's just a green gradation across the screen. So the really interesting thing happens is when we edit a texture and we apply some sort of volumetric texture to this. So I'll add a procedural in here. And what this is doing is it's taking this light and it's applying this color in this three-dimensional shape here. So we want that color really, it defaults to sort of this off gray kind of, but we want it to be a dark color for this, and it'll really stand out. So you see what it's doing, it's kind of subtracting color from out of it. And this is good if you're trying to make a smoke or something, but what if we wanted something a little bit different? Let's try some of these other things. Let's try, for instance, crumple is an interesting one. If we bump up the size a little bit, and then we're going to add a gradient to it. And what this does is it takes the value that I had in the previous layer and it's going to remap it. And what we want to do is we want to bring these together so we're increasing the contrast. Like this, and it's still a little bit too small. Okay, you see what's happening here. As we make it bigger and bigger, you're seeing kind of clumps. It's less of a smoky, and it's these interesting little clumps. And if we bring frequencies down to 3, and let's make it even more contrasty here. Here we go. Now the clumps are breaking up into different shapes, and you have these sort of round blobby things. Okay, so if we were to render this right now, it's not really gonna do anything. It's just gonna be static, and that's not really what we're looking for. We want to really emphasize the fact that there's this depth that we've got in this volume, and we want this texture to do something. One of the nice things about all the procedurals and the way that they work with volumetric lights is that they're three-dimensional. So the light is shining here, and you have this blob in your texture that's a dark part. And if you move it through the light, it's going to, you're going to see it. It's not just a two-dimensional flat image or anything. You've got these shapes and weird, clouds and fogs and stuff moving through here, and we want to exploit that. And we want this to loop as well. So we don't want to just use position to be sliding the thing around, because what happens then is you wind up moving, and somehow you've got to get that texture back to where it was. And there's always a point where it feels like you're moving backwards and forwards, and you do this weird ping-pongy thing. So a better way to loop something like this is to use rotation, and you just spin the whole thing. And with, you know, that obviously you go from 0 to 360 and you rotate and everything's back to where they started from. So that's the easiest way to do it. So we're going to set one up real quickly right here, right now. And we'll just go to the rotation tab and add an envelope for the heading. And we'll add a keyframe here, and we're going to stick it at 300 and make it 360 degrees, like that. And just a habit that I've gotten into, whenever I'm doing anything that I know is supposed to loop, I always like to change the pre-behavior and the post-behavior from constant to offset repeat. And what that does is it continues you on past your start and your end points, like this. You know, if I'm on constant, it's flat. If I'm on offset repeat, it goes. What this is going to allow me to do is, if I have two things that are looping and I've set them both up from 0 to 360, then later on, if it looks like they're in sync or something, I can go into the scene editor and I'll just grab the timeline bar and shift it. And since I've got an extension here and it goes on before and after my time, it's just going to continue that motion. And you know that between 0 and 300, you're always going to loop. It doesn't matter that if I'm starting at 0 and ending at 360, or if I took these, you know, and started at, you know, 88.09 and ended at 448.09. It's 360 degrees difference, so it's always going to loop. So let's set these back to 0 and 360. And we'll close the graph editor. And I need 300 frames here. Whenever I'm making a loop, especially a looping background like this, I like to use nice round numbers like 300 frames. That's 10 seconds. Sometimes it's a little too short of a loop and you can tell really easily that it's looping, but 10 seconds is a really nice number when you're editing and you're working with it and you go, oh, how long is that loop? It's, you know, 262 frames, and that doesn't make any sense. 10 seconds, nice magic number. You'll find later on, as you're working with stuff, that you really come to love magic numbers. So let's take a look at Viper and let's see what this looks like just rotating around the heading. I'm not going to render right now the full 10 seconds long. I don't need to do that. What I can do is I can just hit escape, stop it, and then play it. And I can get a pretty good idea of how it's going to look. Obviously it's not going to loop up here because I haven't done the full 300 frames, but since I'm using rotation and since I'm being smart about my numbers, I know it's going to loop. I don't have to worry about that. I'm more interested in just sort of the general feel of things right now. Is it too fast? Is it in the right direction? Is it doing what I sort of want it to do? Later on, I'll want to do the full 10 seconds just to make sure that there's not some frame at frame, you know, 280 where it does some really crazy thing. For now though, I want to sort of get a feel for this. You can see what it's doing is it kind of feels like there's a couple places where it hits, which is going to be strange, where it's sort of a little too intense. But otherwise, it feels like there's kind of out of focus blobs that are moving away from us, kind of. And the whole thing is kind of roiling and boiling. It's a little chaotic for my taste right now. I'd like there to be a little bit more structure. And also we're finding some places where here it's like there it's really bright and there it's dark. And then it's bright and dark, and it's changing a little bit too much for what we want to do. Remember, when you're doing a background, you want to have, you can have lights and darks and you can have shifts in brightness and things, but in general what you're trying to do is give a stable place where you can read text, where you can put a picture over something, where you can lay things on there. You want the background to be interesting, otherwise you could just put a white screen up and be done with it. But you don't want the background to call too much attention to itself. So if it's changing color too much inside there, that might be too much. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to take this contrast and make it not quite so contrasty by spreading them apart a little bit. unfortunately, what that means is we're losing some of the detail that was in there. And if we were to render a preview now, you'd see that it's still kind of in there, but it's not quite as tightly defined. But I think that's okay, because we can actually, if we want to get separate shapes in here instead of this smoky background, there's other procedurals that we can use. So let's just see what this looks like. So you can see there, it's a little smoother. It's not quite as intense. Obviously, I didn't render as much, so you're seeing the loop cycling a little more. But this would be a much better background than what I had previously. So let's stop this and be smart, and we're going to save our scene here, and we'll call this green volumetric #1. Okay, so what else can we do besides this crumple? Let's turn that off so we're seeing it just by itself. Now, another fun one that a lot of people may not have thought of before is to use the crust procedural. Now let's go back to make our scale a lot smaller. What the crust is doing is it's putting these random dots all over the place, which are actually, remember, this is three-dimensional, so they're random spheres. And so they're cutting out these holes in here, and they're making them black. What I want to do is I want to do the opposite. I want them to be bright, so I'm going to invert this layer. And now what I've got is I've got little holes filled with this volumetric. And I can make it fill up a little bit more by changing either the layer opacity, or I can play with my gradient here. Like so. Let's see. Let's okay. Notice that with the gradient, I'm getting sort of a hard edge around there. It's not terribly soft. Let me also brighten this up a little bit. Increase the density so that there's a little more going on here. Now, if you look at this in just a still, it's kind of this random, haphazard set of blobs and stuff. But let's see what it looks like with the motion that we've put to it. So we'll make a little preview here. Okay, I can tell right away that this is going to be too fast, the way that I've got this moving, because you can see there's huge shifts every frame. So if I were to stop it and play it, you can see, okay, that's like, I don't know what that would be good for. Certainly not this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back in here, and let's tweak this. For now, instead of worrying about looping in this case, let's just worry about speed. So how can we get this to work at a good speed? If we were to say over 300 frames, we want it to rotate 10 degrees, what's that going to look like? All right, you can see it's barely moving at all. That's going to be a little too slow. So let's try 180, see what that is. And this is where Viper really comes in handy, because you can do these quick tests. If I were to want to render this for real, it would, it'd take forever. But this, I can do a motion test really quickly. 180 is even too much. Let's go way down to 45. Okay, this will probably be better. This may be a little too slow now, so 90 is probably where I want to be. Actually, that's not too bad. That's pretty good. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. You can see what's happening with these blobs that are sort of forming out of nowhere. The sphere is intersecting, the sphere of that blob is intersecting with the column that's being created by the light. And so when it first intersects, it's at a point, and then it expands to a bigger circle, and then it shrinks again as that blob goes through. and so you get these things sort of appearing out of nowhere. And the crust texture is nice because it's a sphere. You have it where it comes from nothing and shrinks to nothing. It doesn't just pop on. It sort of grows on you. That would be kind of a neat background. You know, especially if you take a background like this, render it out, take it into a program like After Effects, and apply a few more tricks to it. There's other things we could do to it to make it even more interesting. The only thing that I don't like about this is that there's a lot of black still in there. You know, so let's work on getting rid of some of the black. So we'll go back into here and drop our attenuation a bit, but that makes everything a little bit too bright. If we increase our density, that's going to help a bit. You know, so the other option that we can do is in the is to change our background color. So we want our background to be not black, but maybe like a dark green. Now when we render, that fills it up a little bit more, and you're getting more of a flat green across there. And let's drop our density a little bit more because it's getting really hot up there. It's still rather thick. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure that I'm back on frame 0, and I'm going to take the light. Let's move some of these panels out of the way so we can see what we're doing. Let's take a perspective view. I'm going to have the light move back on its z-axis again, and that will move this really hot spot where the light is actually really burning that volumetric. It'll move it farther away out of the camera's view. Now looking through the camera, you see that we've got a problem because we're seeing the far end of the volumetric. So we've got to extend that on beyond a little bit. There we go. That fills up the screen a little bit more nicely. I think that this is going to be a pretty good start for background. The green color is nice, assuming that our colors are green. And it's pretty flat across there. There's areas of contrast. There's some interesting motion going on. It's not perfect. I wouldn't just hand this to an editor. It needs a little bit more. I'm not sure exactly what yet. That's where the After Effects part of it comes in. But there's something going on there. You know, without animating for hours and hours, I've got something that has a lot of motion. It has some interesting shapes in there where all the circles overlap each other. I know it's gonna continue looking like this for, you know, the whole way that it renders. In this case, since my rotation, I wasn't able to do a full 360 degrees in the 10 seconds, then it's not going to loop all by itself. So I have a couple options. I can either make it a longer animation, render out 20 seconds, 30 seconds, however long I actually need to make it loop, or I can render out, say, 330 frames, and then I can force a loop by dissolving those 30 frames over each other from the beginning and the end and making a loop that way. But let's take a look and just sort of see what our motion looks like first. See, that's kind of neat. It's got these little pop-up little circles, you know, and behind it, it's got things even farther away doing sort of the same thing. You get a feeling of depth because some things are moving faster, some things are moving the different direction. Especially down here in the bottom, you really sort of get this feeling of this stuff is moving. And it's kind of got this churning sort of feel to the whole thing. So let's save this guy off as number 2, and let's make a couple variations on this because I think this is a good start. Now the first thing we can do obviously is we can change the color, and let's say that you know, we need something that's a little bit more of a bluish color. You know, that's obviously pretty easy by tweaking our colors. Okay, it's still a little bit too green. There we go. Now what's happening is we're losing some of the intensity. So we have to, we can either bring up the luminosity, the density a little bit. Maybe bring the attenuation down a bit. And with the red shift up so high, it's trying to tint this green-blue thing more towards the red side, which is where we're getting some of this green from. So if we bring this down, we'll bring it down to 0. Okay, that's a little too intense. Okay, let's see, what does this look like? You want to be really careful with the colors that you're choosing, because see, in these areas up here where it's really intense, you get from this nice blue into this weird cyan color. And unless you're going for cyan, you want to try to minimize that. That's one of the reasons why I've got the light so far away from the camera, because it was just having too much of an effect. So this is the same thing, but with kind of a blue. Now, obviously we can take our rotation, and let's say instead of going to positive 45 on our heading, let's copy that, put it on pitch instead, and we'll get rid of this keyframe on heading. So now instead of rotating on heading, it's going to be rotating in a completely different axis. So this is going to cause a different motion. And this is a really handy way of making two backgrounds that look exactly the same but have different motion. You just change what direction it's rotating on. So now that's a completely different animation right there. These dots are not intersecting that cylinder where the camera's looking at it. They're intersecting the cylinder sort of up here and down here somewhere, and you can see them coming into and out of existence here. But they're moving past the camera, and you really get a really good feel for the parallax, and it really feels like there's depth in there, and that's an even better background than the one we had before. Now another thing that we can do is we can take this same motion and apply it to all of our rotation channels. What happens then is that not only are we rotating around heading, not only are we rotating around pitch, and not only bank, but we're rotating around all of them all at once. And if you've ever rotated an object on all the axes at one time, you'll see that it kind of does this thing, and at some points it's rotating more this way, at some points it's rotating more that way, sometimes more that way, and it sort of gives you the best of every sort of rotation. So if we want it to have those places where the texture is popping through, but we also want it where it's sweeping across, and we want it where it's sweeping across in the other direction, by applying the rotation to all of your channels, we'll get moments where different rotations are taking effect. And let's take a look. So you can see we got sort of the slow drift. We've got the guys dancing in and out, and then they sort of let up for a minute. They're not. You can see at the beginning of the animation they're happening really fast, and then near the end, where all these things have rotated 45 degrees, they start slowing down. So let's save that guy. And this is blue volumetric 1. Okay, so what else can we do? Well, let's take this crust and let's play with it a little bit. What happens if we increase the scale of this thing? Okay, that's rather interesting. If we increase the Y scale, you can see, remember that your light, all these dimensions here are based on your light. So your light is sort of turned and rotated up this way and facing down. So Y, according to the light, is sort of diagonal across the screen. X is going to be sort of in and out. So if we were to change that to 10 and that to 1, so you get kind of rows. You can see where Lightwave is actually sampling the light for each blob, because each sphere is now turned into sort of this weird shaped egg blob, and you can see where it's being sampled. If we were to increase the quality from low to, medium, it starts adding more samples, put it up to best, and you really get this idea that there's an actual blob there. Now this is kind of cool by doing this, because we suddenly have, just in this one still frame, there's suddenly this feeling of motion. You get this blurred feeling that everything's going into there, and your eye is drawn to this region right here. But if we have this texture actually moving, sweeping down or something, it's not really moving there. So you have two conflicting ideas. One sense of motion is going into the screen, the other motion, that's the actual motion, is coming down, and that provides additional interest to your animation. So let's take a look and see what that is. I'm going to turn the quality back down to, let's see, well, we'll put it at medium, because you still get the feel of that motion, but it renders pretty quickly. So you can see everything's going to be moving down and going to be sort of moving past, but it's all going to be focused in here. The way that we have the light rotated, that's our perspective point there. And by having them stretched out really long, you're going to get a really good feel of parallax, where the ends that are farther away from you are going to be moving slower, and the ends that are closer to us are going to be moving much faster. So let's, hey look. See, that's kind of neat. I kind of like that. In fact, I may even like it on medium better, because you can see the slices, and you really get a good feel for the sense of depth that you got there. Okay, but what if, instead of doing that, what if we stretch it along the length this way? Now we've got a completely different one. And this guy, these streaks are running along the length of the light, and they're moving diagonally across it. You're not going to get quite the same feeling of perspective, but you get this stretched kind of marbly kind of feel to it, and you still have the same basic idea. You could get something to look kind of like this by taking a plane and applying fractal noise to it, and then adjusting the colors so that it's just right. And a single frame, you could get it to look exactly like this. But to get it to animate where you feel the depth, that's going to be a lot harder. See here, you've got this sort of, your eye isn't sure what direction are we moving. Are we moving up this way? Are we moving down that way? And everything's kind of moving in and converging, and it's kind of interesting. Okay, so let's put these back here, and this is the one that I really liked when we had X stretched to 10. We can even stretch it higher, stretch it to 100 meters, and then we really get these long streaks going. And we're going to save that guy, because I don't want to lose that. Let's try some other options here. Instead of crust, what if we just did dots? And we put it back at 1. Here we sort of have the same idea as crust, but since with dots, they're at regular intervals. And what's going to wind up happening is that you get more of a feel of this grid, and you get places where, it's like when you're driving and you look out and you're like driving past fields or something, and you have lots of rows lining up, and if you look directly across from you, they all converge, or they converge here. There's different angles where they converge, and that's what's happening here. We get these cool geometric patterns being formed, and then this one's going to dissolve away, and it's going to form elsewhere, and it's, I didn't build anything. I didn't build these shapes in here, but they're really kind of neat that you find them. And it's just because the camera happens to be lying sort of in between where these lines occur. So here we've got motion from where the patterns all line up. You've got some underlying motion there. Then we've got the dots coming in and out. and you still got a parallax feeling because you've got some things moving much faster than others. And you know, that's kind of an interesting background right there. It's always good just to check, see what happens if we bump it up to best or bump it all the way down to low. I actually like low better because you get individual circles. It's almost like this is like some mass of lens flares or something. And when you go to best, it just kind of smears everything together. And let's do a preview on best just to see, because maybe the motion is better on best, maybe it's better on low. But it's so, you know, it's pretty quick to do these tests. So it's, even if you find something you like, go ahead, save it. Spend, you know, 5 more minutes tweaking and something, you may stumble onto something better. Okay, so we've rendered about half a second worth. Let's stop this render. Let's see. That wouldn't be bad. I would go for that. What's happening is these, where the dots are lining up for us, it really feels like there's, you know, where they're passing up and lining in front of the camera. You can feel that continuity that's going back, because it's not like when it's on the low setting. It's not these individual blocks. So there is something to be said for having it just sort of do a continuous sweep all the way back through there. That being said, let's see what happens when we do a preview on low. Now here the individual dots themselves are much more prominent, and the way that they're interacting with each other is making much more of a statement than in the previous version. They're still lining up and doing all those things, but since they're individual, you really want to make sure that you want these dots to be an element if you're going to do this. If your entire graphics package is made up of squares, you probably don't want to do it like this. But let's see what this guy looks like. I don't know, that's kind of hypnotic, the way everything's sort of flying back away from us and sweeping along. And you know, you look in here and you get some interesting effects. And by having these guys sort of coming in and going, and since the dots is a pattern, is a regular grid of these things, they're all kind of coming in at the same time, it's sort of, it really gives us a beat. And if this were laying on top of music, you could time it such that, maybe, such that the music related to when the circles are coming in. You know, so I kind of like both of them. So we'll say that guy is 3, and we'll put it back on the best, and save that version as 4. Okay, and we'll go back in here, and there's well, let's go back to low, just so that we get quick renders. And there's all kinds of different textures in here. You know, veins, for instance, gives us something kind of cool. Let's see. I think I kind of like it like this. Bring that down. You know, this gives us like a strange bone marrow kind of look. If we were to change the colors, let's get off of this blue there and make it almost a white, like that. And that's kind of interesting. You know, and this is just messing around with the procedurals, but you can see how completely different this one is than when I was using the dots texture, and yet it's still based off the same thing. So if you're working with this and you get your colors right, if you get your motion kind of right, you know, it's the right speed, and you want something completely different, you change your procedural. You know, that's neat. Okay, so we'll save that guy as one last one. Okay, so now we've rendered one of those animations, and we're going to take it into After Effects, and we're going to see what else we can do to it, because there's a wide range of things we can do over there to it. So we'll go over here to After Effects, and let's import our footage. Blue volumetric. We'll grab the sequence. In this case, we don't want the alpha channel, so we're just going to ignore that. And then we're going to make a new comp, and here's our background. And before we do anything else, let's just do a little RAM preview and see what we actually rendered. Okay, it's pretty close to what the Viper window was giving us, but there's a little bit more detail. You can see a little bit more what's going on. You know, it's a little cleaner. Obviously, it's D1 resolution, 720x486. So this is what it actually looks like playing back at speed. So that's pretty good. It gives us a good feel, a good wash down there. So what are some of the things that we can do with this? Well, one of the things that I like doing is I like just making sure that my colors are exactly right. Sometimes if this was a little bit too washed out, I would duplicate this layer and change the mode to overlay. And that's going to just pump it up a little bit. In this case, I don't think we need to do this because this is a background and we don't want to be too high contrast in here. So we're not going to do that. But notice how flat it looks when we get rid of it. You know, that's before and that's after. So it's something to think about. No matter how cool your stuff looks like when it comes out of Lightwave, you can always just maybe pump it up just a little bit and take it just that extra step. We can play with some of the effects. So we're going to duplicate this layer. And let's try, first off, a Find Edges effect. Now it gives us this kind of yellowy, bubbly thing, which, okay, whatever. It's not terribly interesting. If we invert it, we get our original colors back, kind of, but it's just very dark. Now what happens if we were to take that layer and try some of the layer modes over the original version? For instance, if we multiply it, we're not going to get a whole lot. If we take away the invert, then we get these little outlines around all our circles, which kind of helps. It helps make them stand out a little bit more. It gives them a little bit more interest. You know, that's how it was before. This is how it was now. If we do a RAM preview on it, you can see it almost makes it like a cell animation. It's almost like somebody hand drew all this stuff in there. It's actually kind of, it's kind of neat like that. You know, what if instead of multiply though, go back to the inverted Find Edges. We're going to change that mode. We're going to change it to add. Now it's sort of the same effect, but it's not like a hand-drawn thing. It's, you know, it's almost like you've got, it's almost like it's out of focus and you've got some weird depth of field thing going on there. You know, that's kind of neat. So you've just done this and you've said, oh, this is wonderful. And your boss comes in and says, but our colors are not blue, our colors are red. Okay, well, we need to make this red. The easiest way to do that is by adding an adjustment layer on the top and going over here and going to Image Control, Color Balance. And then we just rotate our hue around and you can choose just about anything you want. So now here's, you know, here's a deep red kind of tinging into the purple up in the corner there. Or we can go a little bit more pure red, sort of go into the oranges a little bit. You know, and there we go. Here, now suddenly instead of just a blue background, now we've got sort of this orangey red background. You know, and instead of having to go all the way back into the layout and render the whole thing all over again, you just do this. Now, what if you really wanted to be funky and you keyframe the hue? So let's set a keyframe. Back at the beginning, the hue is going to be 0. All the way at the end, the hue is going to rotate around 1 time. So now as it goes, you're going to see it's in blue and it's going to get deeper blue and it's going to turn into the purple. And then this purple is going to start moving into the pinks and lavenders, and then into the reds, and then eventually it'll wind its way over to orange. And then kind of get yellowy, and kind of greenish, and then it'll go back to blue again. Because sometimes it doesn't really matter what color you're dealing with, you just need a color back there. And this way, by rotating the color around like this, it's yet another sort of thing of interest to do, something else to keep it from being too monotone. And here it comes, it's cycling back around, and it's coming up onto the other side of the blue here. And what's interesting is the way that the colors are changing along with the way that the motion of the texture is changing. Because we had a rotation on all the angles, remember we had sort of the wobble rotation going. You have, when it's blue, they're going really fast, and then as it changes colors, the actual motion of the texture is slowing down and changing. And it's kind of an interesting look. Now, also notice that it's not looping. This was the one, remember, we went from 0 to 45 degrees over 300 frames. So it's not going to loop. So what I did was I rendered an extra 30 frames. So I'm going to have to somehow make this thing loop. So what we'll do is go somewhere here in the middle. We'll grab one layer, hit Control-Shift-D. That'll split that layer. Open up our in and out controls. We'll set one layer right at the beginning. We'll set the other layer right at the end. And now where they overlap a little bit, we'll do a little cross dissolve. And then we have to do the same thing for our other layer, but instead of trying to remember where I split it, I'm just going to copy its effect, get rid of it, get rid of the layer, duplicate the guys I've already worked on, and then apply that effect to it, and change them both to add mode. And now our adjustment layer needs to have its last hue keyframe changed so that it's at 10 seconds. So that it loops perfectly, and we'll change our composition settings from 11 seconds to 10. And there we go. Now, when we do a RAM preview, it'll loop. You'll see a little bit of a dissolve in the middle, but it's dissolving on just the texture. The actual color moving around is not dissolving. That's still doing a full circle. Now, normally I would have liked to have had this render as a full loop, so I wouldn't have to do this. Sometimes you just don't have the time to render a 600 or 1200 frame animation. Okay, so here we go. In this case, you're going to see the loop point. It's going to be coming up. It's right there. It's a little obvious because the things suddenly start moving a whole lot faster. So what you might want to do if you're doing this for real is you might want to try rendering out the 600 frames. But you could certainly get away with this without any problems at all. So what are some other things we could do with this? Now that we've got it looping. Let's get rid of this color adjustment. So we'll lose that adjustment layer. And then let's also get rid of the outline, because that's just too confusing for me. We're going to take this looping version of the background, and I'm going to pre-compose it. and we'll call this looping. And now I never have to worry about, grabbing two pieces of footage or not, and this transition is just automatically built in. So now I'm going to take this looping guy, and if we want something that sort of has the same general colors, but maybe we want it even more abstract than this, let's just apply a fast blur only in the vertical direction. And instead of doing something small like this where it doesn't really, all it does is just kind of muddy it up, we're going to take our value and crank it way up, really high. Make sure we have repeat edge pixels turned on. We'll make it like 250. Now when we render, we lose a lot of what we had rendered previously, but we get this shimmery curtain of light that just kind of flows around. And again, you know that it's going to loop, and you know that it's going to have the right colors, all because our background did. Now if we take this and we layer the original guy back on top, let's get rid of his fast blur, and we try out some combinations. Like let's try an overlay mode. Now we sort of have a little bit of both. Now we still have those circles, but we have these vertical elements. These very sort of subtle, but nevertheless there's these nice vertical elements that help give us a little bit of structure. So I can go up to Effect, Adjust, Levels, and I can tweak my little triangles down there so I can make it a little bit more high contrast. And that's pretty good. I don't want to get too many areas where I have like a solid blue color. I still want to have some detail in there, but I want it to be much more high contrast. You can see I'm definitely getting that. And then if I overlay the other guy back on top, or go with an add mode, maybe even something cool like a hard light mode, that's kind of neat. Now those verticals stand out even more. Now there's like a support structure for this thing almost. And in fact, if I wanted to really stand out, I could go back into here, do a find edges. Let's turn off. Let's put the adjust our levels so we're much more intense here, like that. And then we'll take our top layer, put it back to normal, we'll switch the positioning of it, and this guy will set to add mode. Now we've got these sort of strange drippy things hanging off of everywhere, and we've lost the strict verticalness of it, but it kind of gives us an sort of a radio noise, like there's something messed up with it. Let's set this guy back to normal. Actually, we're going to get rid of that layer altogether. Another thing we can do, if this isn't structured enough, it's a little too ambiguous, a little too organic, so let's add a new adjustment layer. Okay, it's not doing anything right now, but let's just take this rectangle like this, and we'll just put it right here, right on the side. Now, go to Distort, Offset. What this is going to do is take everything that's underneath this window, and it's going to offset those pixels as we shift them around. So I'm going to keyframe this. Make sure I'm on frame 0. Keyframe that. Go to the very end, and I'm going to shift my vertical center from 50% of the composition to 150% of the composition. That means that my center is going to move from here, and it's going to move all the way down, so that it's moved exactly one screen length down. What that means is that everything inside the square is going to move one screen down, and everything that falls off the edge here is going to start redrawing itself back up at top. So it does this. So we now have this sliver being taken out of this. And of course that will loop as well, because if it goes an entire screen length down, then you're basically back where you started from. Now, okay, that's interesting, but all by itself it's not all that good. So what you want to do is you want to duplicate this, and you want to make another version over here. And maybe we make this one go sideways. And we'll put it up there. And then we'll duplicate that guy, and we'll move that one down here. Maybe make him, you know, a big fat square over here in the corner. And this one, the big fat square, we're going to shift it from 360 to 243, which is 50% of the composition. At the very end, we're going to leave it at 243, and this time we're going to shift it 150 on the x-axis. This means it's going to move sideways. So we get something like this. So you see here where the two overlap, you've actually got one shift plus another shift layered on top of it. And this one, where nothing's happening, it's moving sideways. So there you go. That's some of the stuff you can do with your base animations. You can take these and apply all these things to them and come up with something completely different, yet that lives in the same family. You can even take multiple animations, layer them on top of each other, combine them different ways. You know, don't go straight out of Lightwave. Take it in here and start playing. Alright, so making backgrounds with volumetric light is kind of neat, but sometimes you need more structure. You need actual physical objects in there. So these are examples of sort of ambiguous shapes that make up our backgrounds, using reflections or refractions, a lot of glass to give you kind of mysterious qualities, distorted, you know, good background type material. And all these backgrounds, you see, they all kind of come from the same family. They all feel alike, the same sort of color palette, the same motion and objects, but they're not exactly the same. And this is really good if you're trying to deliver a package to somebody and you don't want to see that same background over and over again. You can provide them with multiple backgrounds that all sort of live in the same family. So we're going to show you how to build this, making one contraption and then moving the camera around and finding neat spots to look at. So we're going to start off with an empty scene here and go over into Modeler. And what we're going to do is we're going to build something. We're going to be utilizing subdivision surfaces so that we can distort the object and get some strange curves and things out of it. And that'll give us our distortions that we like, and then it'll also change the properties of the object throughout the animation so that you're always seeing something a little bit different, a little bit surprising. One of the things that I built years ago on Axis was this kind of this background made of these glass rings that swung around us and everything. And it's been long enough that I figure I can show you guys how to make it and I won't lose my job. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this ring first off. We start with just a simple box like this, and we're going to lathe it around the z-axis like this, so we get sort of a tube. And we don't really need too many segments, but you know, maybe 24 is not quite enough. We'll do 30 here, like so. So here we have this tube, and it's nice and blocky. And when we turn on sub Ds by hitting tab, we get a nice rounded tube. And it's, you know, not terribly exciting, but it'll work. This one actually, it's not quite fat enough for me, so I'm going to go back a couple steps. I'm going to make this guy a little bit bigger, move him into the center a little bit, relathe it, like so. There we go. Okay, now it's a little bit fatter, so that'll be good for us. And we're going to name this, you know, tube. And now, since we're going to be making this a glass object, what I want to do is I want to copy these surfaces, and I want to flip them. I'm going to name these glass to air. These are the surfaces that your light rays are going to see as they're passing out of the glass object. So these are the inward facing ones. And then I just paste original ones back in, and now what we wind up having is this two-sided object, and this will let us do really good reflections. Okay, so we'll save this guy off. We'll save this as, we'll call it glass tube so we know what it is. We'll go over into layout, and let's load them up here. Okay, so here's our glass tube. And right now I'm not going to really worry about where the camera is. I'm just sort of worried about the general thing. We're going to get a feel for the motion and some lighting here and stuff. So I'm just going to position ourselves so that we can see what's going on like this. Okay, first thing, set up how long we want our loop to be. We'll make it 300 frames. What we're going to do is rotate this guy 360 degrees on every axis over 300 frames. So animated, it does this kind of wobble thing, and you can see, like I was talking about in the previous section, that when you rotate on all the axes, you have different sections of the animation where different parts of it are doing something cool. Okay, so that's kind of neat. Now we need to add a little bit more a little more of a cool factor to it. So what we're going to do is add a deformation onto this guy. We'll add displacement, and we'll use the inertia plugin. And what this is going to do is it's going to give sort of a lag to the individual points. We're also going to make sure that we subdivide it last. Okay, we need to give it a little bit of a rate, so we'll say 0.25. And now, when this thing moves, see what it's doing? It's sort of distorting a little bit. If we turn it off, it's a perfect sphere. We turn it on, it's got a little bit of a distortion. Now notice at the very beginning, it takes a little bit to start rotating. That's because there's no motion on either side of this thing. So we'll go into the graph editor, and on our rotation channels, we're going to set the pre and post behavior to offset repeat. Yet another reason why I like doing this. Now you can see, even on frame 0, it's already distorted because the inertia plugin is looking at previous frames and it's saying where were these points previously. And the farther away from the center you are, it's affecting those points more, so that these points that are on the very outside are kind of dragging along behind. And they get drug along, and you'll see that even with this weird distortion, it still loops perfectly. Now this maybe isn't quite enough, so let's try making that even more. There we go. So now our distortion is really intense. You can see it's really happening. If you add a negative number, instead of lagging behind, it actually leads. So the things that are farther away from the center are going to lead. Now this can be good if you have more than one object. You have one with a negative lag rate and one with a positive, and you get sort of a different deformation, and that keeps things from being too monotonous. For now, let's leave it at a positive number. Set that to 0.5. Okay. Now when that thing's rotating around and doing stuff, you can see why we're using subdivision surfaces, because we're deforming all these sections. We want, when you use subds, you're automatically guaranteed that everything's going to be planar, because it's subdividing it and it's triangulating it and it's making it nice and smooth. In this case, if we increase our subhatch level, you'll see it gets even smoother. When we're just messing around and animating here, a 3 is usually pretty good. But when we're going to render, we're going to want it to be up like a 9 or something like that. Okay, so that's kind of neat. Let's add a little bit more to it though. Let's take this guy and we're going to clone him. So now we have two of them. And I'm going to parent one of them to the other. And I'm going to make it bigger so that they don't intersect each other. Now, if I turn off our deformations here, you'll see sort of what's going on. They're both rotating, but one of them is parented to the other. So the one that's really big is going to rotate twice as fast. So you get this additional level of motion. Now, because that I have it looping and I've set the pre and post behavior, I can go into the scene editor and I can grab our timeline and drag it, say 90 frames, and I don't have that moment where they're both lined up on each other. So they're going to line up at some point. You can't get around that. But at least it's not going to be when they're both facing, a certain, they're not both facing the camera and stuff. And this is kind of cool because now they're going through different stages of their motion at different times. So while one of them is kind of in that wobble, that sideways wobble, and isn't really rotating that much, the other one maybe is still swinging around really big. And so that keeps us from getting a little bit too stale. That's kind of neat. It's hard to see where the loop point is because they're all, just moving around. And we could even do it one better by taking this big guy, right here, number 2, and cloning him and parenting him, the new guy, to number 2. And then let's shift these keyframes over, like so. And now we've got 3 of them, and now we've really got something strange. So that's going to give us lots of areas of motion, and motion that's slow and then it's fast and then it's slow and fast, and you don't get this, it's not just a boring little, rotation. It's kind of got this energy to it. And you can especially feel that in that big one. It definitely, it's being driven by 3 different sets of parented rotations, so it's really going to go wild in some places. Okay, let's turn inertia back on for these guys. Like that. And now here's maybe a good place where maybe glass tube 1 is going to have a 0.5. We'll make glass tube 2 have, negative 0.5. So it's going in, it's leading. That's maybe a little big, so maybe negative 0.1 or negative 0.2. Like that. And then number 3, we'll make it 0.25. Like that. And this guy, we need to make him a little bit bigger because he's intersecting. Now let's check number 2 and make sure he's not intersecting. No, he's okay. Okay, we're still having some spots in there. So that should be okay. Okay. Now, let's look at it from the camera. And the camera is just sort of viewing the whole thing. Now let's start worrying about surfacing this guy. So what we want to do is go into our surface editor. We'll select them both, turn on smoothing, and slide this over so we can sort of see what we're doing. And we're going to add some specularity, add a little reflection, add some transparency, make the refraction index 1.5, and that should be good for now. Then we're going to select just the glass to air, make sure that his refraction is 1.0, and we're also going to make sure that his reflection options are set to backdrop only. We don't want to be ray tracing those inside ones because you get the hollow mirrors effect and it takes forever to render and no one's ever going to notice. It's a little bit less realistic doing it this way, but at least you'll be able to render something in time for someone to, to look at. So let's just see what this looks like just with the ray tracing options turned on here. Okay, so right off the bat, I can see that I'm getting these really interesting highlights here, and this is just a specular from here. I'm also getting lots of little greeny guys around the edge, which we're going to have to figure out why we're getting those. And you know, but I can tell, even without any color, it's just black and white. It's kind of boring right now, but I can tell that this is going to be really cool. You can see in here, you can see that I'm getting some really cool refractions in there, really nice distortions, and especially in this one, that's a really cool look in there. Okay, so here we go. So here's our rendered frame. All right, that's really neat. Now, yes, I do have lots of little speckies and things that I'm going to have to take care of using my anti-aliasing and other things. But that's, you know, for 5 minutes worth of work, that's a great start. Now let's start worrying about colors. Okay. Now the first thing that we want to do is the background. We don't want just a black background, because everything's sort of going to have like a feel to it, a color. So depending on the job, obviously you're going to choose different colors, but we want something that's fairly muted, so we're not going to be too bright. And in this case, we're going to go with kind of a dark purple, something like this. Okay, and let's take our resolution down a little bit so we can render these a little quicker. Okay, you can see what's going on here. That we've got some color back there, but we're getting a little too bright inside. And but I think overall, you know, it's interesting. Okay, so why are we getting such bright colors in there? Well, what's happening is that you have the inside surface of all these things, that glass to air surface. And see, it's got diffuse, so it's actually picking up some white. It's also picking up a little specularity, as well as being transparent. So if we were to turn down diffuse, turn down specularity, turn reflection completely off, then you got nothing. You want to add a little bit in there, but not too much. Let's see. The nice thing about having that be a separate surface is you can control a lot more of the surface. That inside surface is going to have its own specular highlight. It might be tighter, it might be much more wide open than your outside. What I tend to like to do is have on the outside, I like a really tight specular highlight. So on this tube one, I'll have my glossiness set up to say like 60 or something. And then the glass to air, I'll have that down at a 20. And you can see that's much more diffused. Of course, when you have a bigger highlight like that, chances are you want to bring your specularity down, so it's more of just sort of a glow. It's not really too intense. Okay, now if I render this guy out, okay, you can see what I mean by having the two different specularities. This one right here is from your outside tube surface, and it's much tighter. Then you have underneath it, you have this other one, which is actually the back side of the surface, and that's more diffuse, and that's more spread out. We're still getting a little bit of extra brightness in here that I'm not really liking. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to make these a little bit more physically realistic by adding basically a Fresnel effect. I add a gradient to the incidence angle, like so, on transparency, so that when you're looking at something from a glancing angle, which is here, it's going to be not transparent at all. When you're looking at it straight on, it's going to be very transparent. I'll copy this guy, paste him into the reflection. Of course, I have to invert it because I want to do the opposite. On those glancing angles, that's where I want it to be most reflective. When you're facing it, I want it to be not very reflective at all. That's going to really bring down that bright purple kind of pinky purple. So I'll do that. I'm also going to apply those same settings in here to our inside surface. Instead of 100%, this is at 21. And I'll go into transparency and paste it. And I forgot to invert this one. Okay, so there we go. So let's take a look at this one now. Okay, so here we go. So now, let's look at our last one. There, it's got this ultra bright sort of pink purpley look to it. And this one is a little bit more, it just feels more like a real glass object. Let me render this at a slightly higher resolution and just see how it's acting. We should be getting rid of a lot of those little speckles that we were doing by applying this effect. When you have everything at 100% reflectivity and 100% transparency, it's not terribly realistic, and you get things are a little bit too bright, and you find spots that it wouldn't really be that reflective. So in this case, by adding that gradient, we're eliminating a lot of that effect. Okay, so that's done rendering, so we'll zoom out 1 to 1. There we go. Now you're getting a much better feel for what this is going to look like ultimately. You can still see these same distortions are in here, and it's making really neat shapes, because first off, the shape underneath this inside ring is cool to begin with. It's kind of got those weird distortions on it, but then it's being distorted by something else that's distorted, and you got these strange, really warped figures. And you're also seeing the reflections of the one on the outside guy, and you get these nice bright highlights in here. And this doesn't look like anything, but it's not supposed to. It's going to give us an interesting place to do something. Now right now, it's very just sort of one color, because we're getting all our color from the background. So if we want, we can add a little bit more color by, like, if we make this guy sort of a red, make our outside tube kind of an orangey red color, and we're going to change our camera back to 25%, because we're just worried about general color ideas right now. And you can see now we're picking up, oh okay, so now it's getting some highlights around the edges where it's not transparent anymore. Like that. Now, if you're working on a job, you're going to have a color palette, and you're going to want to apply these colors. They're going to automatically go with each other, and you'll get some really nice combinations here, where you'll have hard edges here where the colors really fight. They really stand out, and you get a lot of good contrast. Like you have the purple and you have the red orange, and then you have other regions in here where they softly blend into each other. And that's going to give you a nice range between the two colors. Okay, in this case, this color for me, it's not quite red enough. It's a little too orange. So I'm going to move it over. We're going to move it down a little bit like that. Let's see what we're doing here now. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Okay, so here we go. So here's our shape. Now, how do we take this and make this into a real background? How do we do something with this so that we can actually use this? Because right now it's just this really neat ring thing that's floating around in the middle of space. Well, first thing that I want to do is I'm going to close all this stuff up. I'm going to go back into the backdrop. And this color here, our purple, we're actually going to use that in a gradient backdrop instead of just a solid backdrop color. So I'll take the sky color and the ground color, which are the two that meet in the middle, and I'm going to make them that same purple color, like that. And then I'm going to take the zenith and the nadir, which is directly above us and directly below us. I'm going to make them the same purple, but I'm going to drop the luminosity down to, say, 30. So I'll do that, and I'll grab that purple. So basically chopping the luminosity in half, so it's a little bit darker. what this is going to do is give us a sort of a ramp, and it's going to make the just the ultimate background a little bit more interesting, where it's not, it's very subtle, but it's a bit of a gradient. You know, there's very few times where you want a flat color. Gradients are your friends. Go with gradations. Okay, let's increase the sky squeeze to 10 on both of these. This will squeeze it in a little bit more, and you'll really be able to see that gradation a lot better. Okay, there we go. Now it's more of a bar running through it. And this will give us even more interest when we actually want to make this into a background. So let's save all our objects. And then we're going to save the scene here. And we're going to call this Purple Rings 01. And this is our base scene. This is what we're going to be building everything else off of. Okay, so here we've got the camera. We've got this monstrosity in the center of the screen, and we want to make it a cool background. The easiest way to do it is to take your camera and, you know, point at a certain spot in the space and then zoom in on it so that these things are really big. And then you want to make sure that nothing completely ever leaves the screen. You want to make sure that you're always filled up with something. But you can see that there's these neat shapes passing in front of the camera and doing interesting things, and you get a feeling of depth because you can certainly see that some things are passing in front of others. And when we render this out, you're going to get all your transparencies through there. But you don't really get the feeling that it's just three rings parented to each other. You just sort of have this motion of things sliding around each other. So let's render something out and see how it looks. Right away, you can see this is different, but it's still really cool. It's not what we had before. It's not our rings, but it's the same colors, the same idea, but you get these nice arcing shapes. So we get these really cool shapes and arcs, and there's a lot of motion and direction going on there, and all these arcs, they all kind of follow along, and they complement each other really well. And if we go to a different frame, like if we go into here where this big one comes in front of us, and you can see that for a moment there we're not getting any reflections through here. It's distorting it so much that everything that's behind it is getting distorted, and you're seeing it down there. A frame like this is one of the reasons why I added a gradient in the background, because you can see there's a lot of this empty space back here. And if I just had a flat color, it would be really obvious that it's a flat color. But instead, there's sort of a subtle gradation to a dark down here. Now, that being said, it's still a lot of empty space, and I'm not entirely sure that I'm happy with it. So I'm going to try aiming the camera in a little bit more towards the center, and then I'll just set up my keyframes here. Okay, that's not going to work too. That's moved a little too far the other direction. So I'll kind of split the difference here. And now there's going to be spots, I guess, where there's always going to be something, a big open area like that. And I can either live with that, or I can try to figure out some way around it. I can add more rings. Or in the case of a frame like this, where it's on the inside, what I could do is I could go back into Modeler, and I could just make a ball that sits inside this whole thing. And open up numeric, and I like the tessellated sphere better. Put it at level 3. We want to make it so that it fits inside, but where there's a bit of a gap, like so. we'll turn on sub Ds. We want to do the same thing. We'll surface the outside as tube, copy it, flip it, texture this guy as glass to air, and then paste the other one back in. So now when we synchronize layout and go back into layout, now we have this sphere in there. Let's see what this all looks like. So now everything's rotating around this sphere. If we were to look through the camera, let's zoom out so that we can see everything. See what that looks like. Now this gives us something so that if we're ever looking in the middle of all these spheres, we're never seeing straight into the background. We're catching this glass thing. And this is even cooler. This is even a better look than what we had before. So let's zoom back in. Something like this. And let's just check out our animation, see what we're doing. Now in this case, we're not rotating that sphere at all. It's, you know, it's just a sphere. So it's going to just be rock solid in there. We may not want that. You may not want something just hanging there in space without moving. So what we could do, so we can go to our last frame here, and we can rotate the camera's bank on 360 degrees. So it's still pointing at the same region in space, but it's going to be slowly moving, so that sphere is not always going to be up in that top right-hand corner. So it's going to be moving like this. That adds yet another little aspect of motion to it. Okay, so let's save this guy. Save the scene, purple rings, 02. And we're going to save the objects as well because we've changed them. Okay, so now there's one. And when this animates, you have a certain feel and a certain sense of motion to it. So let's make another one. What we'll do is we'll have the camera and we're going to zoom out a little bit so I can see where I am. Like so. And we're going to move the camera over to someplace else and change the angle. Instead of, I could have just changed the angle and looked at a different place, but what I really want to do is I want to actually move the camera, because that's going to change the rotation relative to the camera, and it's also going to change where my specular highlights are hitting. So I want to have it be different enough from what I'm previously rendering, but I still want to have it close to what I had. So that, you know, this could be an interesting spot. And we'll zoom in here. And now we're looking almost completely at the ball, like this, with these rings passing in front. So there you go. So now this is going to be dominated sort of by this general region where you're only seeing the ball. And around the edges of it, and occasionally passing over in front of it, you're going to get the rings reflected through it. Now, as you're rendering these, you want to make sure that your object has high enough subdivision. For instance, if we have our object here and we go into the Geometry tab, if instead of rendering it at a 9, we rendered at level 3, let's change them all to a 3, then when I render, you're going to see that it's going to look a lot different. Even though I've got smoothing turned on, I'm catching edges, and it's really bending there. The smoothing algorithm is good, but it's only so good. And especially when you're distorting things a whole lot, you're going to notice these kind of things. This was at level 9. This was everything at level 3. So it's just enough. If we view the wireframe here, you can see when I increase the mesh, you can see it's a lot smoother. 3, 9. You want it to be high enough that you get a nice smooth look to it. On the other hand, if you wanted to, you could set it to say 0. Set these all to 0. And that's going to give us something entirely different. You may actually kind of like this look. Let's zoom out so we can see what we're doing. So now instead of these smooth tubes, it's more of these blocky, clunky shapes, so that you don't get quite as much distortion in there, but you can still tell that it's glass. You know, this is kind of neat all on its own. By keeping it subdivision surfaces, we're not making illegal polygons by distorting everything like that. And it gives you the flexibility to change this if you need to. So let's save this scene as number 3. Okay. So now let's make one more version of this scene. Now, we've done a couple where the camera's positioned outside, but what if we were to put the camera all the way on the inside and had it just look straight ahead? And in this case, we're going to want to take this ball and we're going to want to turn the ball off because we don't actually want to be inside the ball. So now we're inside. So things are passing around us. Now let's turn off our bank on the camera. So we'll set the bank back to 0. Now in this case, instead of being zoomed really tight in, we want to be zoomed really far out. Like so. So now we have these really wacky sort of arcs going across and over us. Now this is a completely different sort of look. They're still kind of curved, but in general these feel much more linear than the last couple of renders. You know, these are all round and stuff. Much more straight and angular here. And yet they all have the same color palette. They all sort of share the same idea, the same general sort of feel and everything. So let's save this guy as number 4. Okay, so there's a couple different ways of manipulating this, but what else can we do? Okay, well let's take the camera, instead of putting the camera on the inside, let's take the camera and parent it to one of these tubes, like this. And then we're going to move the camera. Let's view it from the side so we can see what we're doing. Like this. The camera is parented to this big outside curve. So we're going to move the camera way up here, so we're still on the outside. And then we're going to look down, so we're looking directly at the ring. And then zoom in, like so. Now, wherever this ring moves, the camera's going to move. But this ring has the inertia plug-in on it, so it's not always going to be centered directly underneath the camera. You'll see it's going to sort of warp and distort underneath us. And yet, it's still going to be the main sort of focus. The other guys are going to go a little bit more wild. This gives us sort of a combination of these. We have these really straight angular guys because you have one that's pretty centered under the camera. And then you have all these other arcing guys. So you have the straight and the curve. And that gives us a nice sort of combination of the two. And if we wanted to, we could even zoom in even more. And we could also take this object here. And if we turn down our inertia lag, so instead of 0.25, we turn it down to say like 0.1, then it's going to be moving around a lot less underneath us. If we set it to 0, it's not even turned on at all. So we'll set it at 0.05 so we get some distortion and some wobble. But for the most part, it's going to hang underneath us pretty much the whole time. So here's a different sort of feel. And in this case, when it's animated, this main bar is going to generally stay in place, and you have these other guys moving underneath it. But again, same feel, same family, completely different background. So we'll save this guy as number 5. So in a very short amount of time, we've now made 5 backgrounds that can easily be delivered to an editor or something like that, whoever's going to be using these. And they all live in the same family, they have the same sort of feel, same motion, same color, same everything, and yet they're completely different. And you'll find that that gives you an enormous amount of power because your viewer is not going to get bored by seeing the same thing over and over again. Okay, so you're at work one day and your boss comes up to you and he says, hey, we need an animation for Valentine's Day with lots of hearts, and we need it right now. So what are you going to do? You can't just give him one of your volumetric light backgrounds that you've been reusing for a while. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you how to make a background using specific elements that then later on you can use when your boss comes to you and says, we need that Halloween animation. You can take the same heart background, replace the hearts with pumpkins, and change a couple colors here and there, and you've got a brand new background with hardly any work. So we'll start off first by making the heart background. And of course, the place you want to start is to have a heart object. I've got one built already, so we'll load it up. And this was a pretty simple object to make. I had a heart shape, and I just rail beveled it, so it has a nice curved edge on it that'll catch some little highlights and glints and things as we go. Now what we want to do is we're going to have a whole field of these hearts, and so we want to have them kind of scattered randomly about the scene. The easiest way to do that is to go to another layer, and we're going to make some random points. 100 should be good. We'll throw those out, and let's just take a look at our heart for reference. Every single one of these points is going to be replaced by one of these hearts. So we want to scale up the points a lot larger so that there's actually room for all the hearts. So we'll zoom out here, and then we'll just scale up our points a bit. Maybe something like that. Then we switch our layer so that our heart's in the foreground, all our points are in the background. Go to Modify, Point Clone Plus. Now what we want to do is set our random rotation, our minimum to -360, and the positive to 360 on just the heading. This is going to make all the hearts be spun at different amounts of, different rotation angles, but only on the heading. We don't want them tumbling. They're just going to be positioned in different orientations like that. Everything else is pretty much okay. One of the things that you might want to do is change the random size. So we'll make it like from 0.9 to 1.3. That'll give us a little bit of variance. So some of the hearts will be smaller by about 90%. Some of them will be bigger. So let's clone those guys out. And here we have a nice festive field of hearts. And we just sort of like to spin it around and take a look and make sure that you don't have really places where hearts are intersecting. Like I see that this heart here, these two guys are intersecting each other. So let's find out where they are. They're over here. We'll zoom in on them. Select this guy. Alright, and we'll just move him out of the way a little bit, like that. Yeah, you don't have to do that, but I tend to notice those things sometimes when it happens, and it always bugs me, so I try to fix it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to name this first layer lots of hearts, and our second layer is our reference points. We're going to need to save those because later on, if we want to go and change out this background, it's nice to have those points again, so things are cloned in exactly the same position. Of course, you don't have to clone in exactly the same position, but you know, as soon as you delete those points and save your object without them, that's when you're going to realize that you needed them. Okay, so let's save this object as lots of hearts, and then we're going to go into layout and load them up. So lots of hearts. Okay. Now, in this case, what I think we're going to do is we're going to have these hearts slowly float up as if they're emanating from somewhere below us, and they're slowly going to float up the screen. And of course, like everything else, we want this to loop properly. And you might think with them scattered randomly around the screen like that, that's kind of hard, but it's actually not as bad as you might think. The trick is to go and change to bounding box mode, and we don't need the reference points in the scene, so we'll remove them. And here we go, we have a box that's the shape of our hearts. Now we're going to clone this guy twice. And we'll take one of the clones and move it strictly vertically up exactly so that the bounding box hits itself. And that is 98.7778 meters. Copy that value because we'll need it later. And we'll take the third one. And this time we're going to move this one the same distance but twice that. So one of the nice things about Lightwave is you can just type 2 times and paste it in there, hit enter, and it automatically multiplies it out for you. And if we zoom out, we can see now they're stacked nicely one on top of the other. Now if we look from the side, here's our camera, and it's looking at the first guy. What we really want to do is make sure that when the camera, at the very initial frame, we want to make sure that the camera is not seeing this empty space below the first guy. So if we go to the camera, you see we're going to see a lot of empty space here. We don't want that. We also want the camera to move closer. So we're going to center it on X and then lock that off so we can't move it. It was push in on it a bit. It's about there. That should be good. This way we know that hearts are going to fill the screen entirely. And then we're going to move down to about here, because we don't want to see down through the bottom of that box. If we see down through the bottom of the box, we should be seeing hearts that are below, and we don't have any hearts there. Now what we want to do is we want to go to our last frame, which is going to be frame 300. So we'll move over there, and we're going to want to move the camera vertically the same distance that we had to move those blocks of hearts. So all we do is go into the Y position, paste that value in that we earlier did, make sure you hit plus, hit enter, and now the camera has moved up to 116.4706 meters. And if you notice, if you go from frame 0, frame 300, nothing's changing. And that's going to be perfect, because when we play this, the camera is going to move up and it's going to get to frame 100, 300, and it's going to move right back down exactly one loop distance down. And just to prove it to you, let's take a look. And all our hearts are going to be in the same position. Now, the only thing that's changing here is the light, and that's not going to have any effect on us right now. Okay, so we got that far. Now, let's make it a little bit more interesting. Let's have these things also be moving sort of around in this direction. That's going to give us some good parallax as hearts pass in front of and behind each other. In order to do that, we'll add a null, and we're going to parent all the hearts to that null. And then we'll take that null, and by frame 300, we're going to rotate it 360 degrees. Like that. And now as we go, the hearts are going to slowly go past us. Okay. Now the only thing left to do now is set up our lighting, figure out how that's going to work. So let's look through our light, and we're going to select the light, and we're going to move back. This is a distant light, so it doesn't really matter where we're pointing, but it's nice to kind of get a feel for what it's actually going to be lighting up by looking through it and moving it into a more realistic location. We'll look through the camera again, and let's just do an F9, see where we're at. Alright, it's not terribly exciting right now, but there certainly are lots of pretty little hearts. I think what we need to do is we need to make these guys kind of reflective, give a little bit of an environment around there. We need to catch some, all these edges. We got some nice curvy edges. Let's catch some light off of them and do something. So we'll go to the image editor, load up high dynamic range image. I like building probe. That always seems to work well. We'll load that guy, and we're also going to load just a black frame, and that's going to go in the background so that you don't actually see the HDR with the camera. Then we'll go up to the scene tab, go to backdrop. We'll add our image world environment and select the HDR. And then under the compositing tab, we'll add the black image. That way it makes the HDR visible to the reflections, but it makes black visible through this back spot back here. And then the other thing we're going to do is we're going to check our surface. Okay, our heart is reflecting this, and our environment, we have ray tracing turned on, so let's just turn it on here as well, just to see how those hearts look when they're reflecting each other as well. See what this looks like. Okay, we're starting to catch more highlights here. I think when we increase the anti-aliasing, we're going to see that a lot better. And you can see in certain places, you can see where the hearts are reflecting each other, but not a whole lot. That may be enough, it may not. We're about to put in a volumetric light, and that's going to affect what they reflect and how that stuff looks. So let's wait until we do that before we make any more modifications. So let's now add in a nice light. We're going to add a spotlight, and this will be our volumetric light. And if we look from the side, we want to have this basically placed way down here, and we're going to have it down low so the light's coming up, and we're going to place it behind all the hearts, so it kind of is coming towards us as it's shining. We'll look through the light, and we got to rotate it up and around so that we see everything like that. We'll make this exactly negative 180 degrees. 53 is about right. We're going to squeeze in the cone angle a little bit so it's not shooting light out all over the place. We're going to tighten in, just have it shooting where we want. Like that should be pretty good. And now let's open up Viper and take a look and get an idea about what we're going to be doing when we turn on volumetric lighting. Okay, medium quality is probably too high, so we're going to switch it to low. We'll look here, and you notice you're seeing your HDR in the background in Viper. If that bugs you, sometimes it bugs me, I'll go back into our backdrop and just turn that plug-in off temporarily. And that should get rid of it. There you go. Now we go back to volumetric lights. And we don't see a light. That's because it's only extending 10 meters. We'll go back to our side view, and let's move some stuff out of the way so we see what we're doing. So let's increase this from 10. We'll try 100. Okay, 100 is only getting us that far. We're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, about 1,000, let's say. Okay, and that's extending up past us, which is pretty good. We might eventually need more, but I'm not sure. We're going to increase the attenuation a bit because we want a nice soft gradation there. And then we're also going to give it some redshift. All right, that's getting a little too deep red. for Valentine's Day. So we're going to set that back to 0. We're going to change the light using medium color, where we can actually define our pink. I tend to like trying to do it with redshift first, just to get an idea of the color, because by adding redshift, it changes based on how much light you're seeing, so it changes the color. Here, when you apply a color to it, it kind of gives an overall color. It doesn't quite look as good sometimes. So I like to try it with redshift first. Not always successful. Okay, that might be pretty good. We might have to back off the attenuation a little bit to fill in up here. We don't want that completely black. So now let's go back and turn on our Image World plugin. Turn that guy back on. Close this. And let's try another F9 to see where we're at. All right, well, that's very, very, very dark. So we need a lot more light. So that means that we're going to have to increase this. Let's give it another 0.25 kilometers. And we're going to cut down our resolution in the camera properties panel so that it renders a little bit faster for now. Okay, that's too much. Let's try 1.1. All right, that's starting to fill it up a little better. It's getting very white hot here, and it's still very dark here. And personally, I don't like the fact that the hearts are as small as they are. I kind of want to zoom in and get more detail. So we'll go into the camera properties panel and look through the camera here. Close these guys so we can see what we're doing. And zoom in a little bit. And this should get us past that big white spot that was down here. Should get rid of some of the black that was around the edges. And it'll also enable us to see more detail in the hearts here. You notice we should even be able to still loop even when we cycle back and forth between the first and the last frames. So zooming in is not going to have any effect there. It's good to always check that regularly just to make sure. Do another F9. All right, I think that's a little better. Let's take a look and see what it looks like at full res. And we'll turn on anti-aliasing up to medium here. Okay, it's nice and pink, but you're getting a good gradation going out here. It's not just completely flat pink, and we are seeing some reflections in there. I think I might like to see more on the face of the hearts, though. They're a little flat. And then the other thing is, if you notice, this volumetric light is not casting any shadows. And so it's not quite as dramatic as it could be. I mean, there's no reason to have a volumetric light here, really. I mean, you could have gone and made a gradation in Photoshop if this is how you're going to do it. But we want to exploit the fact that it is a volumetric light. And so we're going to turn on shadow maps on that light and make it a little bit more interesting. The other thing I'm not entirely sure I'm happy with is that it is still getting kind of blackish, kind of a gray out here. So we're going to have to deal with that in a minute too. Let's figure out the lighting situation first. So we're going to turn anti-aliasing back off, go down to 50% just so that we can render more quickly. Open up the lights property panel, shadows, set that to shadow map. And we're going to increase this. I hardly ever stay with the 512 as my shadow map size. And I like to increase the shadow fuzziness 3 to 5, something like that. So here we go, and hopefully this will... Okay, you can already see that it's causing some streaks. Yeah, that's much more dramatic. If we go from this to this, it just really... You really feel this burst as the light's coming up. Yeah, I like that. Okay, now we got to work on the reflections on our surface. So let's go into here and let's see what I've been doing. Okay, I've got a texture on the reflection, and it's a gradient based on the incidence angle. And when it's a glancing angle, it's highly reflective at 100%. And when you're looking at it face on, it's all the way down at 0. So let's change that to 50. So then it's always going to be at least 50% reflective. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, here we're catching a lot more interesting stuff going on. You can see more hearts. You can see part of the high dynamic range image being reflected. There's more hearts in there. I think that this will give it a little bit more interest when the whole thing is animated. Okay, and then the last thing is that this is getting a little kind of grayish. And the way to get rid of that is to not use a black image as your backplate, but use a red one instead, and that's going to be way too vibrant red. So we're going to edit it. We're going to take down the saturation so it's kind of pink. We're going to make it a little bit darker as well. Oh, like that. Maybe a little darker still. We don't want this to go black, but we want it to be very, very, very dark, deep red. Let's take a look. Okay, yeah, that looks better. It's filling it up a little bit more. Everything's got the right cast to it. You're not going to black. Yeah, I like that. I like that a whole lot better. Let's bump up the resolution, make sure that it looks good, clean, and then we'll just take one more look at the animation, make sure it's doing what we want it to do. So we'll bump this up to 100%, anti-aliasing at medium, to an F9, and render this out. Now, right now, I've got my anti-aliasing set to medium with adaptive sampling turned on. A lot of times I find I can actually get away with setting it to low with adaptive sampling. It makes it render a lot faster, but you do get more jaggies that way. By setting it to medium, it's going to be a lot cleaner. And with something like this where you've got these curves and they're giving us fine little edges of reflection, you want to make sure that you're getting that and that you're actually anti-aliasing that properly. Okay, so now it's done. Let's take a look at it. And I think that's looking pretty nice. I think it's looking pretty good. There's one thing that bugs me. It's the fact that I can see the seam in the image world plugin. What it's doing is it's taking that round ball that we loaded up, the image that it looks like it's a silvered ball, and it takes the center of it, and that's what the camera's looking right at. And then it takes that edge and it kind of like pulls it as if it's wrapping it around a sphere and takes it and tucks that all together right behind us. And that's really good because most of the time you never see that. But if you can see in these reflections here, you can see where it's all crimping together into a point. So what I'm going to do is close all this stuff, go into the backdrop, open up the image world plugin, and we're going to set the heading offset to 180 degrees, and that's going to rotate it so that the cleanest part of that HDR, which is the center of it, is going to be now rotated directly behind the camera, so it's going to be in a prime position to be reflected by all of our hearts. Now for my test, I'm going to bump this down to just to low, just so we can see it, and we'll render this guy. The next thing we're going to do as soon as this is done rendering is we're going to go to the very last frame and we're going to render a test frame. It should look exactly the same. If there's little tiny errors, you might be able to get away with it as they slip through, but you kind of want to avoid those kinds of situations. Okay, yeah, that looks much better. Look at it here, and you've got this weird crimping. Here, it's just everything's softer and it's a lot better. So let's minimize that, and we're going to go to frame 300, render that. Now, theoretically, this should look exactly the same as the last one. Alright, so that's rendered. Now, if you're really observant, you'll have noticed that there's something different between the two without even looking at the other one. Yeah, that's right. The lighting is not quite the same. However, I'm looking at all the hearts, and all the reflections seem to be the same, so I don't think we have to worry there. The only difference is our lighting. So let's get rid of that. Get rid of that. What happened, you'll be able to see when we take a side view. Let's go back to bounding box mode here. Okay, frame 0, here's the camera. There's the camera, there's our light. As we go, the camera's moving up, but the light stays there. So what we want to do is go into our options panel. We're going to turn on parent in place. We're going to go to the scene editor. We're going to parent this light, which is our volumetric light, to the camera. And then turn off parent in place. You generally want to keep parent in place turned off, because otherwise if you're on frame 200 and you parent something to something else, it's going to make a keyframe there for you, which you don't necessarily always want. In this case, we do want it to make a keyframe for the light at frame 0, and it's parenting it in respect to where the camera is. So you notice neither one moved position. If we hadn't had parent in place turned on, we parented the light to the camera, the light would have moved somewhere else based on wherever the camera is, and we wouldn't have liked that situation. But now this light is parented to the camera, and it'll always remain in this relative aspect. So now the light is moving up with the camera. And now when we do our render at frame 300, then the lighting will be appropriately bright. Okay, so let's take a look. Here's the render at frame 300, and here's the render at frame 0. Now there's a little bit of a difference in the lighting. The only thing that could be from is because now the light is at frame 300, the light is casting a shadow through these guys below it, and it's affecting the one on top. While at frame 0 it's not. So we're going to have to make one more clone of our object and put it underneath, just so that at frame 0 the light is casting a shadow through them. The camera's never going to see them, but it matters to the light. So we'll go there, we'll clone this guy, and this guy is actually going to be at negative whatever our value was, like that, and now it's underneath. Now the light is shining through one layer, and that's going to cast shadows into there. And there you go. Now let's save this real quick. We'll save all our objects, and we're going to save the scene as lots of hearts 01, like that. And now we'll take a look at our hearts, and let's just view it. We'll open up options, we'll say play at exact rate. Now depending on how good your video card is, you're going to be skipping frames here, but at least you get a feel for generally how the motion's going to work. And there's our loop point. Seemed to loop fine. I didn't see any major hits or anything. And this feels good. The hearts are scattered all about in different orientations. They're sort of floating past us, and they're drifting along. Okay, so let's take a look at the final animation. And I think it looks pretty good. I think the lighting is nice and dramatic. I think the hearts look really good, and I think it gets you in the Valentine's Day mood. And this could very easily have been pumpkins, or little leprechauns, or snowmen, or whatever you want. You just instead of doing the point clone plus with hearts, do it with the other objects. So there you go. You've got 3 different ways of making backgrounds. The volumetric light, sort of arbitrary, strange backgrounds. You've got the more solid and realistic ones with the blorpy shapes, and you've got these ones that are more thematic by adding in actual objects that the viewer is going to recognize. And don't be afraid to go into After Effects and do further tweaks there, because I think that's a very powerful area that many people ignore. So, till next time, I'm Rich Helvey. Thank you very much.